cancer, the link between parasites and cancer, and how cancer is an infectious disease caused by a parasitic infestation, and how many parasite drugs are being repurposed to treat cancers. If we haven't met, my name is Pam Bartha, and I'm the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. This topic is really important because we're seeing a real significant increase in cancer and aggressive forms of cancer over the past 3 to 4 years. And we're not going to talk about why that is because we don't want to get censored. But basically, what has changed in the past 3 to 4 years? So cancer has been on the rise, but over the past 3 to 4 years, there's been a real significant increase in the number of cancer cases, but also in how aggressive these forms of cancer are. And there is this huge link between parasites and cancer that we want to explore today. It's probably a several-part series, but today we're going to really talk about how different parasite drugs are incredibly helpful. They're anti-cancer, they treat cancer. So when we're looking at the relationship between parasites and cancer, we know that they both can survive and multiply independently of external growth factors. And they are also resistant to something called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. They also have an ability to avoid our immune response. So our immune system is not going after cancer cells, not like it should, but it isn't when we're dealing with cancer. But then also parasites, they have this way to make themselves blind to our immune system and cause our immune system to just let them grow inside our bodies. And they are very adaptive to changes in their environment. And so therefore, because they're so hardy in our bodies, like both cancer cells and parasites, it's really hard to eradicate parasites 100% out of our bodies, like to sterilize our bodies. It's virtually impossible, but definitely we can decrease the presence of parasites in our bodies significantly to the point where we have no symptoms. So when we look at lab tests, lab studies, and also animal studies, but also human studies, they're showing that there are some parasites that definitely can cause cancer, directly or indirectly. So they can directly cause cancer, or they can stimulate the development of cancer through various different means. And there are several parasites that can cause cancer. We'll talk about a couple of them here. So maybe you've heard me talking about flukes. So there's different types of flukes. Those are flatworms. They're smaller than a long roundworm. So they could be anywhere from, like, the intestinal flukes would be 3 to 5 inches. Blood flukes would be much smaller. Liver flukes would be smaller also. But there are blood flukes. We talked about how swimmer's itch is a type of blood fluke. So we have no idea. I had no idea. I thought that swimmer's itch was a type of bacterial infection, but I looked it up and it's a type of blood fluke. So blood flukes, they can actually increase the risk of cancer 500% or 5 times bladder cancer. And there's another Siberian liver fluke or cat liver fluke, and also other liver flukes. So different species, so they're like different cousins of infections. They're really linked to bile duct cancer. And then there are other infections that have been linked to cancer also, other parasitic infections. But the evidence is not quite as strong as flukes. So flukes, there's a really big connection between fluke infections in our body and cancer. So other types of parasites that are linked to causing cancer would be toxoplasmosis, and that's a type of parasite we can get especially from cats, from their litter boxes. We talked about neurocysticercosis, which is a type of, it's the small immature form of the tapeworm. that can get into different, so when it's neurocysticercosis, this tapeworm larval cyst gets into the central nervous system. That's also been linked to the development of cancer. Cryptosporidium and Trichomonas, those are two other parasites that are linked to causing cancer. So it's not really well understood in science, like how these parasites cause cancer, because we're not studying that. We're just keeping parasites separate from cancer. And that's the problem. Number one, we don't have good tests for parasites. The experts, our practitioners are told that we don't have parasite problems in developed countries, which we do. And so there has not been enough research to help us to make the connection between parasites causing cancer, unfortunately. But there is a growing interest and in the scientific literature also. So it's coming, but many of us that are really sick, that have cancer, we can't wait for that research. We have to do our own due diligence and learn this ourselves and take appropriate measures to treat the parasites to recover from different types of cancers. So again, the way that these parasites cause cancer is not well understood because we're just not studying it. We're not, the research, again, cancer is a multi-billion dollar, like hundreds of billions of dollars, this industry. And so why are they going to study parasites? Because if you treat like with a cheap, non-patentable parasite drug, it's just like it destroys the whole cancer industry. So again, they were talking about in these studies that we really need to do more research to kind of look at, which types of parasites are causing which types of cancers, and which types of parasites are even linked to causing cancers. So on the other hand, it's known that the immune response against some parasites can show anti-tumor activity in the body. So we know that some parasites actually suppress immune function. And even with multiple sclerosis, there's studies saying, certain worms are good for MS because it suppresses the immune system, just like it would if you're using immunosuppressive drugs. But that's not what we want. So it could be that one type of parasite is suppressing the immune system's response to another type of parasite that would be causing cancer or causing neurological symptoms, etc. So parasites, they can have both tumoral or anti-tumoral effects they regulate the immune response. Again, some could be immunosuppressive, some parasites can cause a lot of inflammation. They also some of them could prevent different types of, like when you've probably heard of angiogenesis, where there's an increase in blood supply to the tumors, or metastasis, where the tumors, the cancer cells are moving into different parts of the body. And so they can also regulate inflammation that induces cancer development. So again, I personally don't think any parasites are good in our body, yet I'm open to, I do understand that that's why we need to have diversity in our ecosystem, in our microbiome, because there are certain microbes that will keep other microbes in balance. So there could be certain different types of microbes that will produce natural antibiotics that can keep pathogens under control. So it could be that there is some types of microbes that are not parasitic in the body, but they actually are parasitic to the parasites that we get that would cause disease. So a parasite is any microbe that causes us harm. And so if there's a microbe that doesn't cause us harm, we wouldn't call it a parasite. We would just call it a microbe, and it would be a health-promoting microbe, like lactobacillus, for example. There are some cancer drugs that are effective for parasites, which is crazy. We don't talk about that. So cancer research has been used to design new parasite treatments, new parasite drugs. For example, schistosomiasis, that is the fluke, so that would be the blood fluke infection. There is a drug, and it's imatinib. I don't know where they come up with these names anyhow. So this drug is used to treat leukemia. So this is a cancer drug that's used to treat leukemia, and it is actually effective in treating schistosomiasis, which is the blood fluke. So it's been found to produce a substantial effect on that parasite. And then there are also cancer drugs that target kinases, which are a type of enzyme, and they have also been found in the literature to be helpful against malaria and leishmaniasis. So those are two different parasites. And then there's just a lot of other different types. So there's a histone modifying enzyme that's been intensively studied for drug development in cancer and in parasitic diseases. So which is interesting, so there are parasite drugs that are effective to treat, there are cancer drugs that are effective to treat parasites. And cancer research is often used to come up with new parasite treatments. So there's this big going back and forth between, cancer drugs, they treat parasites, and parasite drugs treat cancer, and there's so many similarities between parasites and cancer cells. It's crazy. So let's talk about a few different parasite drugs. So there's albendazole and mebendazole. So what I'm giving you right now is just like scratching the surface. It's just tweaking your interest. It's helping you to say like, oh man, I should do my own research. You can go to PubMed, you can just do a Google search, or go to PubMed and you can just type in, like mebendazole, albendazole, anti-cancer, or potential cancer treatment, or just mebendazole and cancer, and you'll see that it's a promising new drug for treating cancer. So just a really quick search, I found albendazole and mebendazole have been repositioned as promising anti-cancer drugs. So what happens is this information has been suppressed for so many years, but now it's getting to the point where there's a growing interest in parasites, and there's a growing interest in the connection between parasites and cancer. So they probably can't stop this or keep it hidden anymore, but it still will take many, many years before we have where we're treating cancer with parasite drugs. Before I forget, I want to mention Joe Tippin. So there's this, I think he was a chiropractor who wrote an article about this gentleman who had a very aggressive terminal cancer, and he was given just a few months to live. He was asked if he wanted to use an experimental cancer drug, and so he did. He used that, but then somehow through a veterinarian and a friend, he found out about fenbendazole, and he used fenbendazole, and he used that experimental cancer drug, and his cancer went into remission. He became completely free from his terminal cancer. And so then he went back to the doctors, and he's like, they checked him and they're like, oh my gosh, you're totally cancer free. And he said, well, I've been using this parasite drug, but I don't know if it's a parasite drug or if it's this cancer drug. And they said, well, everyone that used that experimental cancer drug died, so it must be the parasite drug. And then the doctors were commenting to him, yeah, we know that a lot of these parasite drugs, they have tremendous anti-cancer properties. They treat cancer. And he's like, you do? Why aren't we using it, right? And so he stayed on a low maintenance of that drug for years and years. And I'm not saying that fenbendazole cures all cancers. If you have cancer, it's really important, because cancers affect us much more quickly than, let's say, a neurological disease. So it's really important that you use the right treatments. And so we'll talk about like some of the parasite drugs, how they treat different cancers. At the end, I'll help you to kind of figure out like, how would we know which parasite drug we would use if we're dealing with cancer, or which parasite drug our practitioner would prescribe for us. So albendazole and mebendazole, again, repositioned as anti-cancer drugs. They've been shown both in vitro, which means in the lab, and in vivo in animals against liver, lung, ovary, prostate, colorectal, breast, head and neck cancers, and melanoma. Interesting. That's a wide range of different parasites. So we know that albendazole and mebendazole, they treat roundworms. So could it be that roundworms actually cause cancer? It certainly could be. And then there are 2 clinical reports of albendazole and 2 case reports of mebendazole have revealed promising effects of these drugs in human patients having very different types of cancers. However, because of the toxicity of albendazole, so the liver has to metabolize albendazole, so you could not use as high doses as mebendazole. So mebendazole is not metabolized by the liver. Albendazole is, so it's a little harder on the liver, and that's why you don't want to use high doses for long periods of time. That's why you have to work with somebody. You can't just wing it. You have to use effective doses or it's not going to do anything, but you have to also protect your liver and the rest of your body. So again, the albendazole, they would prefer not to use it at high doses for long periods of time because it can definitely impact the liver. Then there are other parasite drugs. So there is macrolamides and benzimidazoles and artemisinin and quinolines. So the first one, the macrolides, they are a class of drugs that manage and treat different types of bacterial infections. So you may have heard of azithromycin or clarithromycin and erythromycin. They're commonly used to treat different types of bacterial infections, so pneumonia, sinusitis, pharyngitis, tonsillitis. They've also been used for certain skin infections and in pediatric patients. So they definitely are helpful in treating some types of cancers. And then the benzimidazole, that group of drugs, those would be like fenbendazole, which we just talked about, and oxybendazole. So those would be 2 different parasite drugs that, and I'll talk about where they're helpful for cancer. So the anti-helminthic drugs, so anti-worm drugs, so both of these macrolides and also benzimidazoles, and also the second 2, which are anti-protozoal. So the first 2 were like for worms, and the second 2 would treat protozoa, which are single-celled smaller parasites. And so they summarize the research to date on the role of these drugs in cancer. So overall, these drugs, they regulate tumor growth via multiple targets, pathways, and modes of action. So these anti-parasitic drugs are good candidates for comprehensive, in-depth analysis of tumor occurrence and development. So they are promising drugs for cancer also, which is interesting because the protozoa drugs, like some of them are for malaria, right? And possibly babesia, those are protists, and maybe giardia. So the protists can cause cancer. Looks like worms, roundworms can cause cancer. And of course, tapeworms, which would cause the neurocysticercosis, can cause cancer. And that's why it's really important when you're dealing with cancer that you don't just kind of go on farms and you just try one parasite drug at a low dose and it doesn't do anything. Like, you don't have time to waste. And also, to be on the safe side, like, really important, we'll talk about all the steps, like diet is really important, and using a layering of therapies, etc. So the next drug that's a parasite drug is Alinea, which is nitazoxanide. And so just one study, and there's more. I'm just scratching the surface. I'm kind of giving you guys an opportunity to go, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was a link, and I'm going to take this on myself and further it. And again, every Friday we release our newsletter. There will be a new article written, and I will have all my condensed notes there. So make sure you're on our email list. You can go to our website, livediseasefree.com. At the top, you can type your name and your email address, and that way you're going to get notified when our newsletter comes out. Then you can go through my notes. You can see the shorter version of it. You can pass this out to doctors, to healthcare professionals, to integrated practitioners. We need to get these discussions going. Really, really important. So let's talk about, so nitazoxanide, which is Alinea. It also holds out a lot of promise for precision therapy for various cancers. So prostate and colon cancer cells contain high amounts of activated beta catenin, which correlate to treatment-resistant cancer cells and other cancer parameters. So in this study of the cancer abating potential of several non-cancer designed drugs, this team, so this was a Norwegian team of scientists, they discovered that Alinea, or nitazoxanide, was well known and approved. It's an anti-parasitic drug. It actually breaks down that activated beta catenin. So it breaks down that substance from the cancer cells. So we discovered that this specific substance is blocking the signaling pathway in cancer cells. So again, Alinea, or nitazoxanide, is anti-cancerous. So it has like anti-cancer properties. It's not often that researchers discover a substance that targets specific molecules as precisely as Alinea does, said this professor on this team. So antiparasitic drugs such as fenbendazole have caught the attention of researchers studying pancreatic cancer. And in early studies, they have shown promise in inhibiting growth and spreading of cancer cells. Pancreatic cancer is really, really serious. So if I had a specific type of cancer, I would do some searches on PubMed and on Google, and I would see like, okay, which parasite drugs would treat, let's say if I had pancreatic cancer, I'd say which parasite drugs have been known to be able to treat pancreatic cancer. And you probably can't find it with a search like that. I would just do each drug. I'd do albendazole in pancreatic cancer, mebendazole in pancreatic cancer, fenbendazole in pancreatic cancer, and just see, or lung cancer, whichever it is, but do each drug with the cancer you're dealing with. And then, as we do in the Live Disease-Free plan, we also get energy tested. So take these common parasite drugs and be energy tested and see if you can find a correlation between what you energy test well for, plus what the literature says as far as the type of cancer you have. Like, is there studies that are linking a specific parasite drug that could be helpful for the type of cancer that you're dealing with? So that's what I would do. That's a little bit more strategic than just trial and error. That's not worth it. It's really important to, we'll talk more about it. Like, it's not a simple thing. Like, if you have cancer, you have dysbiosis, so you're out of balance. So you're going to have more than one type of parasite, but obviously maybe one of the parasites is causing the cancer. So you still want to treat the other parasites because it takes pressure off of your immune system, so your immune system can function better, because maybe some of the parasites are causing immunosuppression and then others are causing more of the proliferation of cells. It can be a little bit complex, but not that complex, because there's roundworms, there's flatworms, so there's tapeworms, flukes, and roundworms, and protists and bacteria. So it's not like infinitely different types of parasites. So it's really neat that, you know, something like fenbendazole can be helpful for pancreatic cancer. And would I just bank on just taking, like with my practitioner, just doing fenbendazole? No. We know that cancer loves sugar. There's TED Talks on YouTube. So it's really important to go low carb. The Live Disease-Free plan, like going down to at least 30 total grams of carbs or less. We've seen people's tumors shrink, especially even non-malignant tumors like meningioma, where it just disappears. So really important to go low carb to kind of slow down the parasites so they're not as active and they're not going to reproduce as quickly, cause as much inflammation, support your body, and then start treating. So it's really important to follow all those steps. Several studies have provided initial evidence suggesting that fenbendazole and is a potential in treating various types of cancer, pancreatic cancer, and others. But of course, Health Canada, and I can't remember, maybe this is 2020, but Health Canada lists all fenbendazole products as veterinarian use only, which is not true, because I know of a pharmacy in Canada where they do have fenbendazole available for human use. So in the past, fenbendazole was only for animal use, but it is safe for human use if used properly. Same with all the parasite drugs. You have to use them properly. You have to know what you're doing. You cannot just do this yourself. It's not worth it. Let's talk about ivermectin for a moment. Ivermectin promotes the death of cancer cells in patients with breast cancer. And ivermectin is an antiparasitic drug used worldwide since 1975 and treated at least 1 billion people, primarily for river blindness and other parasitic infections. It's inexpensive. It's safe. There have been thousands and thousands of doses and people using it. If you use it properly, it's incredibly safe and incredibly inexpensive. It still is more expensive in developed countries than it should be. If you're in like Africa or in Mexico, it's pennies compared to developed countries, which is really not fair. But again, they don't want us using it. In Canada, it's really like ever since we had that last global health crisis, we're not allowed, the doctors are really not allowed to prescribe ivermectin. There's been a lid put on it really tightly. So, and in other countries too, I'm sure, but in the United States, they still have access to it. So it's really frustrating. There are hundreds of studies linking ivermectin to having anti-cancer properties, to being a potential treatment for cancer. So I've just literally touched on a few. There's praziquantel. I didn't even get a chance to look at that one yet. So again, in summary, we have an understanding that there are so many similarities between parasites and cancer cells. We know that cancer drugs, they can treat, certain cancer drugs will treat parasites, and we know that certain parasite drugs will treat cancer, and we know that sugar feeds cancer. Cancer is an infectious disease. Absolutely. There's no question about it. So that this is well established, and even our traditional medical standard of care, they know, like if they're following the research at all, they know don't have sugar when you are dealing with cancer. So for example, you might have cancer and you're going through chemo and radiation and you feel like you're in the clear and you're making all these healthy smoothies with bananas and all kinds of fruit. You're pre-grinding all the natural sugar. There can be 5 teaspoons of sugar in a banana. I've talked to people like I'm just recovering from cancer, and he's got this smoothie and I put all these healthy bananas and berries and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, do you have any idea how much sugar is in that smoothie? No, I had no idea. Do you know that sugar feeds, and cancer doesn't care. These parasites don't care where the sugar comes from. It can come from different types of fruit. It can come from cookies, pop, whatever. Sugar feeds cancer. And if it's a virus that causes cancer, we know that viruses are not living and viruses do not eat food. So I don't believe that it's viruses that cause cancer, because viruses are not living. They don't need glucose. They don't need carbohydrates. But parasites do. And we've talked about how that these different types of parasites, that they prefer glucose, they prefer carbohydrates and sugars as their energy source. So I believe that all chronic disease is caused by infections, different types of parasites. It's just that some of them like to live in different parts of our body. It could be the combination, as I mentioned. Maybe some will suppress our immune system more and then allow others to reproduce more quickly, or maybe one of them is doing both. I don't know, but all I know is that when we're really sick, whether we have autoimmune or whether we have cancer, we don't just have one type of parasite. And if we're just focused on one magic parasite drug to cure us, we will be sadly mistaken. It requires, so with a Live Disease-Free plan, I'm going to go to your questions in a minute, but with a Live Disease-Free plan, it requires, like, stop feeding the infections, the parasites so much, get them to be more quiet. You'll see inflammation going down, you'll see symptom improvement, then support the body, then start to treat the parasites. And we use a layering, so we will use because we know that we're dealing with big and small parasites, we will use like herbs, but we will also use the parasite drugs that we test well for, the herbs that we test well for. We'll use oxygen therapies. Ozone is great. It's expensive. We use something that's a lot cheaper and a lot more effective, in my personal opinion. And then I just can't talk about it here, but you can find videos that I've done. It'll be more on Rumble and on our website, livediseasefree.com, about oxygen therapies in treating parasites or treating disease, treating MS. And so you can see that there. But you have to use a layering of therapies. Parasites are hardy, just like cancer cells are. They're difficult to treat. It's not like taking a week or two course of antibiotics to treat a bacterial infection. They get into your tissue, they get into the central nervous system. Some of the parasites can lay several 100,000 eggs in a day. They can lay dormant in your body. They can lay under biofilms. They can be either egg form or larva form. So it takes time, it takes treatment cycles. But the neat thing is that it's like you're not sterilizing your body from the parasites, but you're decreasing them as much as necessary so that you're completely symptom free, and then you're managing them. So you're still going to be exposed to parasites, and if you didn't clear all of them, you still might have a few, but you learn how to knock them back periodically. And you have to use, again, a layering of therapies to do so. And when you do so, it's absolutely miraculous. But if you just rely on our standard of care for cancer treatment, it is incredibly hard on our immune system. It really significantly decreases the strength of our immune system. It is toxic to the parasites too. We talked about how some of the cancer drugs are anti-parasite drugs too. So yeah, they're toxic to our body, the cancer drugs, and they're also toxic to parasites. But the problem is that when you have, let's say, a parasitic infestation, and you take these I'll just call them the medical approach for treating cancer. I'm trying not to say specific words, but if you just use that, it will knock back the parasites, but it will also knock back your immune system. It suppresses your immune system. And if you don't build your immune system up, you still will have some of the parasites. You now have a weaker immune system, and then that's how we end up with relapses of cancer. We have cancer coming back. And then after what we've gone through also with the last 3 or 4 years with this new issue that we had to deal with globally, that has really impacted whether we took the intervention, whether we didn't take the intervention. We're seeing an explosion of really aggressive cancer. And so we have to use a strategic approach. We have to use a combination, a layering of therapies, but we also have to support the body. A magic pill is not going to work. That's why we have to use a proven strategic plan, and that's what the Live Disease-Free plan is. So it's not just for MS, it's not just for autoimmune, it's for cancer, for heart disease. It's because all of these conditions are infectious diseases. There are different types of parasites. It's just that some of us have, maybe more big worms, small worms, protist bacteria, but we do have a combination. So I'm going to go to your questions. So hello. I can see the intentional flukes stimulate the tissue to proliferate, and yes, flukes cause a lot of inflammation in the body. So when you look at life cycles of flukes, like when you do the CDC life cycles of flukes, it looks like it's like an Asian thing, that it's like they're just present in different countries. They're not present in our country, but they are one of the, schistosomiasis is the biggest cause for bladder issues, according to integrative practitioners that I study under. And they cause a tremendous amount of inflammation in the body. They're nasty. I'm sure that what I have been dealing with in the past was intestinal flukes. I don't know that I had blood flukes because I never had bladder issues, thank goodness. But most people that have multiple sclerosis, they end up with definitely a lot of bladder issues, and the blood flukes will go there. I believe they go into the lungs too. They can get into the bile ducts, etc. Also liver flukes, but they're really nasty, and we don't even talk about them. We don't even acknowledge them. And again, like if there's a nice lake and you're swimming in it and there's a bunch of geese and you get swimmer's itch, that is a type of fluke. That is a blood fluke. And that's bizarre because we don't talk about it and we don't even know it. And so what happens is you could swim in the water and you can get this swimmer's itch. A lot of kids get that, right? When we take our kids to the lake and there's some geese or ducks around, and they're passed through the ducks through their feces. And then if the water's warm enough, they reproduce. And so then our kids get really itchy, and our immune system should clear a lot of them. But if they get past the immune system and they get into our blood and they set up camp in our body, we're not going to be really, really sick internally right off the bat. But then we can start to have a chronic parasite that's living with us. And over years and over, different types of stresses like eating poorly, like too many carbs and too much stress, and then changes in our hormones like pregnancy and childbirth and stress and not sleeping well, all of these different factors will weaken our immune system and allow the parasites to become stronger in our body. And then, so we could have been exposed. For me, it was probably when I was a child. We had a farm and I was on a lot of antibiotics, and we had a pig barn, and I used to love helping my brother and I helping our dad in the pig barns. He'd clean the pens, and there's, I'm sure, tons of parasites there, and you can get intestinal flukes from that for sure. But I didn't know. I knew that I was always skinny and always had stomach aches, and I had acne, and so I was put on tetracycline for months, and that definitely didn't help matters. But then I did travel to Africa, but I didn't have to, but I could have picked up malaria there too, or babesia in Canada through the tick-borne infections or mosquito-borne infections. So again, it's not just one parasite, but it's so interesting how, anti-malaria herbs and drugs are anti-cancer, and anti-roundworm drugs are anti-cancer. And I didn't get a chance to look at the praziquantel, but I'm sure I'll put that in the notes. I definitely will look into that. But those are kind of like the main drugs. So there's albendazole, ormebendazole, and there's also fenbendazole. But there's other ones too. There's thiabendazole, there's niclosamide, there's Alinea, there is praziquantel, parental palmitoate. So there's a few different parasite drugs. And again, if you're dealing with cancer, and if you test well for 3 to 5 parasite drugs, you're not going to just take one, right? But then you're also going to use the oxygen therapies, and you're also going to use different herbs. So you're going to use a combination of things while you're supporting your body, while you're taking back your health by, doing activities, and, all of that is important. Building a healthy lifestyle is still important. But there will never be a single magic pill cure for cancer. There won't be, because these parasites are really hardy. So even let's say you had a tapeworm, it's going to require probably 2 or 3 different drugs that will all act synergistically together, plus using oxygen therapy, plus using herbs, plus cycling through several cycles. But when you hit it right, you'll start to notice huge improvements. And low carb is so important because you can start to see tumors shrink even with low carb. And then there's certain nutrients that are really helpful. So glyconutrients, they are really supporting immune function, cellular communication. You can find that on our website. Again, it's just supporting your body. And if you do look on our website, it's called Ambrotose from the company Manitech. They have different types of Ambrotose. The only one that I like is the classic because it's immune modulation. We don't want to stimulate the immune system. So immune modulation is great. Ambrotose complex. So that's a nutrient that really supports immune function, cellular communication, and that's important too. And not just glyconutrients. You want to just support basic nutrition. So we don't take a ton of supplements. We just fill in the gaps of what's missing from our diet, So a multivitamin mineral from plants, maybe a little bit of extra calcium, binders to suck up the poisons that the different parasites are producing. So we're not taking tons and tons of different supplements. But then the oxygen therapies, oxidative therapies, and our body uses oxidation also for treating parasites. So yes, intestinal flukes or blood flukes or liver flukes are awful. Yes, they're very, very nasty. And schistosomiasis causes squamous cell carcinoma. I'm sure that it does. Like once you start digging, you'll be just shocked and you'll be like, why doesn't my doctor know this? This is like in the scientific, like what do they learn in med school? Like seriously, what do they learn in med school? They don't learn all of the stuff that's super helpful for us. All right, and fenbendazole, you feel like I'm the only one here. I could not figure out how to convert the dosage of praziquantel from animal to human. It always is combined. I personally would not take praziquantel or parasite drugs for animals. Like you have to be really, really careful. There could be other things in it that are not good for humans. Also, the dosages for animals and ratios of drugs definitely are not good for humans. So please be really careful with that. You asked your doctor for praziquantel. So I don't know what country you live in, but I do know that in countries like Canada, they cannot treat parasites. They definitely will not use parasite drugs for cancer. They have to follow standard of care, just like for multiple sclerosis. So they have to treat specific diseases with approved drugs. So for like MS, it's going to be the disease modifying immunosuppressive maintenance drugs, and that's pretty much global now. They've got control over that. For cancer, it'll be specific chemotherapy drugs. They will not, like most places will not be allowed to, unless it's like a research place or it's an integrative, and depending on the country. So that's the frustrating thing. So for Lyme disease, Ronnie, what we've noticed is that for Lyme disease, that it's not just Lyme disease. My students that had Lyme disease and worked with Lyme later doctors, they pass really big worms. So again, it's not just Borrelia that's causing Lyme disease. So after the first dose of albendazole, a fluke or blood clot embolism appeared on his chest wall. Yeah, so just make sure that you are working, or that you guys are working with practitioners. It's very, very important that you're working with practitioners. You're very welcome. And let's see here. So Christine, hello. Ivermectin has been demonized, just like cannabis, hemp. Yes, absolutely. So just be aware too that, like, my opinion on marijuana is that it does have some antimicrobial properties, but the THC in marijuana really has negative impacts on our brain function. So regular use of marijuana, the THC in it, it really is linked to much higher incidence of psychosis. So bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, depression. So for that reason, we don't recommend it, even though it does have some antimicrobial properties. It definitely can help with pain. It can help people sleep. Some people find they have a little bit more mental clarity. But if it's at the cost of changing your brain and changing your mood and changing the way you think, it's not worth it. So wellness champions, they want to have a really high functioning brain. And so we do not use like marijuana for medicinal purposes. So in certain countries like Canada, we can purchase marijuana for medicinal purposes. We can get prescriptions for it, but it's not worth, and it really breaks my heart that you can get hard drugs now in Canada. You can buy them. Our country is completely out of control. And I just pray every day that things are going to change. But we really discourage the use of marijuana. Like a good full spectrum CBD is fine with no THC, or such minimal THC that is not hallucinogenic is fine, but you don't want to hurt your brain. Absolutely not. You're so very welcome. So yes, personal experience, joint pain resolved on the keto diet. So parasites love carbohydrates. So go low carb. The Live Disease Free Diet Guidelines, you'll find them on our website under research. You can start implementing. There's a cheat sheet you can put in your kitchen, and you'll start to notice a lot of symptom improvements if you get your carbs low enough. They are super microscopic. Also, yeah, so some of the parasites, like even there's videos, I'll try to put the video in that shows like protists in cancer too. So again, it can be totally different parasites for different types of cancer. What do I eat for breakfast? What I really love for breakfast is I'll have a lot of greens. So like I love arugula, or maybe a tender kale, like young kale that's not really hard. Just a variety of different greens, and some olive oil on it, and a couple of eggs, and maybe some sauerkraut, raw sauerkraut for the healthy microbes. And that will last me for a few hours because of the healthy fat. So the protein and the fat is what gives you the sustained mental clarity, energy for hours. But it's really important that you're having enough calories if you want to maintain your weight. So as far as the the methylation defects, that it could be, yes, I've known about that for years and years and years. We don't focus on that because there's so many things that can affect your gene expression. So there's your microbes, your mood, your food. There's so many factors that affect which genes are turned on and turned off. So our students are not really focused on methylation defects, and they're getting better. Last couple of questions. We learned that OVA and parasites tests will reveal parasites, and the CDC is the authority on infectious diseases. Both lie. So the very best parasite drug tests that we have, so the very best parasite tests that we have currently will pick up about 10% of the parasites that we're dealing with, unfortunately. So we do not have, this is spoken by the very best parasitologists. They're saying we're really not picking up the parasites that we're dealing with. So that's why with our students, we don't recommend. You can get a parasite test done, but you're not going to find the parasites that are causing your biggest problems in those tests, unfortunately. So last person here. So it's great information. I never thought how important the type of parasite would be in determining the type of drug. Yes. So like fenbendazole is not going to treat all different types of parasites, and so ivermectin is not going to treat all the different types. So they treat specific types of parasites, and that's why it's really important that you use the right treatment. It's just like any other drug, right? And again, I'm not against pharmaceuticals. I think that if you're in a crisis, to use them short term, very precisely for a very short term to get you out of the crisis, that's fine. But for like if you have chronic disease, to use them ongoing for years and years and years, that's not the answer. And it just makes us weaker when we're using immunosuppressive drugs. And it just makes it so that we are not able to fight other infections if you're suppressing your immune system. And then we end up with other diseases, and then we end up with other medications. So if this is the first time that you've made the connection between parasites and cancer, or parasites and chronic disease, make sure to check out my masterclass training, which is how I recovered from MS and others. Check out our website, livediseasefree.com. Look at our blog. There are amazing articles that we're covering really important topics. If you'd like to be on our newsletter list so that you get the Cole's notes of this presentation plus a shorter version of the video, and you can share it with doctors, with other groups, start talking about parasites. And if you enjoy that I share this information with you, please help me get the word out. This information is suppressed tremendously, so make sure to like, share, and subscribe. That really helps the algorithms to push this out to other people so that they see it. And I hear every day from people that are like, I have been searching for years and I've never made the connection between parasites and the disease I'm dealing with. And just think if they knew right away how different their life would be, because we lose years of our life suffering when we don't need to. So make sure to, that's how you can be a wellness champion, is to share it. If you need support, if you don't have a doctor, if you need a proven plan, we can help you with a Live Disease-Free plan. You'll learn about that in my masterclass training. Otherwise, hope you have a wonderful week, and we will talk to you next week. Take care and bye-bye for now.